Yesterday, it was the fate of a civilization. Today, it's the fate of the ceasefire, sifting the warring interpretations of what has and has not been agreed to. President Trump said in the past few weeks, NATO has been tested and NATO has failed. Pretty awkward prelude for the president's meeting with NATO's General Secretary. We explore. MAGA Republican Klay Fuller won the special election for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat in Congress. His margin of victory in North Georgia much narrower than Greene's. Worrisome? We asked the congressman-elect. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. This morning, the adjective for the U.S. Iran ceasefire was fragile. At this hour, flawed might prove more accurate. The White House said there had been a quote-unquote uptick in tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Then, Iran said it had closed the strait when Israel continued bombing Lebanon, killing reportedly 112 people and wounding hundreds. Iran said Lebanon was supposed to be part of the ceasefire. The White House and Israel, still coordinating hour by hour, said it was not. Hezbollah, an Iranian terrorist proxy operating in southern Lebanon, remains the target of Israeli strikes, though today's bombing in Beirut killed dozens upon dozens of civilians. The White House also said Vice President J.D. Vance is scheduled to lead negotiations in Islamabad, Pakistan, with Iranian officials later this week. Considering the day's events and the already frayed edges of the ceasefire framework, those talks, well, they may or may not happen. The administration, though, is by turns triumphant and cautious. Hear the sound of triumph.
Other presidents marked time and kicked the can down the road. President Trump made history. Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory.
This, the sound of caution.
If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice.
Oil prices, both Brent crude and West Texas Intermediate, fell below $100 per barrel today. They were trading, we should remind ourselves, in the $70 per barrel range before this war began, meaning currently high gas prices likely to remain high for the foreseeable future. Even so, all three stock market indexes rose by more than 2% in what can only be described as a kind of sugar high of ceasefire optimism. It's worth noting that as recently as 6 days ago, the Strait of Hormuz was not even a priority for President Trump. Now it appears to be the linchpin of this ceasefire. As a quick refresher, in his primetime address to the country, the president said America did not need oil or natural gas that flows through the strait, but Europe did. And he told Europe in that address to find some courage.
Go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy.
Not easy, as it turns out. The president, in that same address, also said this.
When this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally.
We don't know if this conflict is over. Everything looks very tenuous right now, but at this moment, the strait is closed to traffic, or that traffic is significantly stymied. The only natural thing about all this is, if you know military history, the age-old fight over a choke point through which economically valuable goods flow. We begin tonight with Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, lots of questions to the White House press secretary today, and it appears to be a kind of clash over what the 10-point framework is, which one is real, and which ones aren't real.
Well, Major, there is apparently one that was acceptable enough to President Trump to enter this ceasefire agreement with Iran. As you know, yesterday the president posted on Truth Social this announcement that he had agreed to a 2-week period to stop bombing and attacking Iran. And he said that there was a 10-point proposal from Iran that was a, quote, workable basis on which to negotiate. So there is some version of a 10-point proposal that certainly the president wanted to use as a jumping off point. But you're right, Major. This is what Caroline Leavitt had to say about that during the press briefing just a couple hours ago.
The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. Many outlets in this room have falsely reported on that plan as being acceptable to the United States, and that is false.
But based on our reporting and based on history, including what the Iranian top officials are saying today, we have a very good sense, Major, of the points that Iran would want to be in any proposal that it enters with President Trump and the U.S. In fact, its foreign minister posted on X just a short time ago that the U.S. is already violating a ceasefire proposal because of a key issue, which is Iran's belief that it has the right to enrich uranium, which is, of course, a key material to build a nuclear weapon. Well, just today, President Trump said that there would be no enrichment of uranium. He also said that the U.S. would work with Iran to dig up the amount that is still left over in Iran, even after the U.S. Bombed key sites over last summer. So that is one sticking point. There are others, Major, including who is going to control the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says it wants to control it, even floating the idea of charging a toll. The president at one point said that maybe the U.S. and Iran would control it together and both charge tolls. But today, the White House said that the president wants free passage for those ships. But of course, even if there are ships flowing through, and Caroline Leavitt said there has been an uptick, we don't know, Major, just how much more traffic there is, and more importantly, when that will cause gas prices here at home to come down.
All very important points. Weijia Jiang, North Lawn on the White House. Thank you very much. Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon joins me now. He sits on the House Armed Services Committee, a regular participant in this great program. Congressman, I'm glad to have you with us. What's your take on what's happened in the last 24 hours?
We had a ceasefire on paper, but it's not been reality. As you mentioned, Israel, struck Lebanon, but it was the United States and the Israeli view that that was not part of the ceasefire. Evidently, Iran thought it was. But also, Iran struck Kuwait, UAE, and other friendly countries in the Persian Gulf. So we've not actually seen the ceasefire take place. Our goal is to have a friendly government that wants to be friends with us and its neighbors, respects human rights of its people, and also does not want a nuclear weapon. It's very hard to get this kind of government or to get regime change with air power alone. We may have to settle for something less. I think we've done a great job of treating much of the military in Iran, and they will not be a threat for 5 years to come or so, though they could threaten the Straits of Hormuz. But what worries me, you have an enemy regime that hates us in place. Russia and China will at some point help them replace the destroyed military, and there will be a threat once again. And so I think if I was a guy in the White House or the National Security Council or the Pentagon, I would ask myself, is this tolerable? Do I want a threat 5 years from now, or can I live with the fact that we bought ourselves some time?
Congressman, the president keeps saying the regime has changed in Iran. Do you believe that?
Well, the top two leaders have been killed, and a lot of the top tier leadership, but it's still the Ayatollah or the mullahs. They're the family of that regime. They're very anti-American. We have to also realize that it's discouraging to hear some of the comments from the White House today. You cannot trust these guys at all. They have never negotiated in good faith with America ever since Ronald Reagan tried to, back in the early 1980s. But it's not the same actual leader, but it's the same brand of leadership. It's IRGC. It's the radical Islamists that are governing it. And I feel bad for the people. When you poll Iran, they're the most friendly, the most pro-American folks in the Middle East, maybe outside of Israel, towards America. And they want to have their freedoms back. But it's hard to do that with air power alone. That's the challenge we have.
The president also told Jonathan Karl of ABC today he might entertain the idea of the United States and Iran jointly splitting toll revenue through the Strait of Hormuz. How does that strike you?
Sounds rather ludicrous to me that we would be working with the mullah regime that hates us, that's killed over 1,000 Americans since 1979, to include some of my friends, like at Khobar Towers that targeted an Air Force dormitory, killed 19 Americans. I think it's very ludicrous. Again, Major, there's no way to work with these people. They hate us. We're the big Satan to them. So I think we should put very little stock that we can have a cooperative relationship with them. They're going to have to really do a good job convincing me otherwise that they can do that. But I also accept the fact we may not get regime change, and we're going to have 4 or 5 years of an Iran that has a much degraded military, a much degraded threat to the region. That is a good thing.
I want to shift your attention to something you've talked about this week, which is the vice president's trip to Hungary on behalf of Viktor Orban, who's running behind in all but government-backed polls for re-election. And the vice president was asked today why he was there. And he said, let me read this to you, and I want to get your response. We came here fundamentally to try to counteract some of the propaganda coming from the bureaucracy in Brussels. I've never seen something like it. I'm still quoting the vice president here, where you have the bureaucracy of the EU trying to impose costs on the Hungarian people in order to sway the result of an election. How do you respond to that?
First, we should not have a senior leader campaigning for a candidate in a NATO country. We let those countries and their voters decide. We would be offended to have somebody come to our country and campaign for the Democrat nominee or the Republican nominee, whatever it may be. It would bother us. Stay out of our country. Let us decide our elections on our own. Well, that's how Hungarians feel as well. We should stay out of their elections and let them decide. It could be that the other side's going to win this, and they're going to remember that Vice President Vance went there and campaigned for Orban, and it's going to create problems down the road. Now, why does EU have troubles with Orban? Well, first, it's the most pro-Russian. He is the most pro-Russian leader within NATO, and he's undermined NATO's attempts to help Ukraine at every step. In fact, he's been a big nemesis to Ukraine, which is a victim of this Russian invasion. So there is legitimate reasons to be, I would say, disappointed in Orban, but we let the people decide of Hungary. We don't get involved and interfere. I think most Americans would be offended if someone like Vance from another country came to our country and did the same.
Before I let you go, Congressman, you're going to be back in Washington, as will all of your colleagues next week. Do you think next week will be the week that the House passes something that the president can sign to end the shutdown with DHS?
We're going to pass the Senate version of the bill that does not have ICE or Border Patrol. I think it's a mistake by the Democrats. I mean, in this case, we've already fired the Secretary of DHS. We have the person overseeing the Minneapolis operations is now gone. And there's been changes in tactics and strategy that our leadership has put in place. I think there's already been changes made. We need a Homeland Security. We need a Border Patrol. We need ICE. Granted, I think they overstepped at times. I know that's happened in Omaha, but we need them funded. But we're going to fund the Senate version, but that does not fund ICE or Border Patrol. And we're going to have to find a different way to fund those two agencies, and we need to do it quickly.
So the shutdown will effectively end next week?
Other than for Border Patrol and ICE. And people say, well, it's already been funded through reconciliation. That is like halfway true. The funding that we did in reconciliation funds the agents, but it doesn't fund any of the support personnel. So say you're a secretary, as just an example, at ICE, you will not get paid under the bill that we passed this coming week. So we need to do more work. Everybody that works for the United States of America should be paid.
Congressman Don Bacon, Republican, Nebraska. I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you. NATO Chief Mark Rutte is in Washington meeting with President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He's here to, if he can, that's a big if, smooth things over with the president, who has been very critical in recent days about NATO because he's frustrated the alliance, its member nations, did not offer support to the war that the president, along with Israel, launched against Iran. Earlier, I spoke with Ivo Daalder, former ambassador to NATO, about the state of things. Mr. Ambassador, as you're no doubt aware, the White House press secretary read a quote from President Trump today at the briefing, and it went something like this: NATO was tested and NATO has failed. How do you interpret that, and what do you think the near-term future of the alliance is?
You know, NATO was tested once on September 11, when the next day it invoked Article 5 for the first and only time of NATO history to come to the aid of the country that was attacked, which was the United States. NATO was tested by deploying thousands, tens of thousands of troops to Afghanistan. Not one single NATO country thought that was important for their security. They thought it was important for American security. They weren't tested in this case of Iran for a very simple reason. They weren't asked to be part of it. They weren't consulted on whether this is the right thing to do. They would have told the president if they had been consulted that this was the wrong war at the wrong time. And oh, by the way, it was illegal under international law. So the whole idea that NATO was tested and failed to test, that may be something that the president believes is just not something that NATO is about or NATO believes.
Mr. Ambassador, the administration hasn't made this argument directly, but it's made it by implication, that Iran for 47 years, essentially since their revolution in 1979, has exported terrorism in the region, and it has touched Europe with acts of terrorism. And that should be a concern of NATO. And NATO, therefore, had an obligation, once the United States decided to end or sufficiently degrade that threat to the region and to Europe, it should have joined in. How do you evaluate? Like I said, that's not a direct line of argumentation, but it's implied.
No, it's a fair argument. And if the president of the United States and his officials had come to NATO and spent time talking to allies about their view of the threat and the nature of the consequences of continuing to have that threat in the region, and laid out a plan for how to deal with it, including militarily, some of NATO allies, I have no doubt, would have come along and said, okay, I get it. This makes sense. We're willing to join you. But that's not what the president did. What he did is he just announced one day by video that he was going to strike Iran. He didn't ask anybody for permission. He didn't ask anybody to participate. He didn't ask anybody whether this was the right or wrong thing to do. And it's very different, for example, than George W. Bush did in the case of the Iraq War. George W. Bush spent 18 months trying to understand and then make the case for why war against Iraq was important. Now, not every European country agreed with that. Some of them strongly opposed it. The French did, the Germans did, as it was their right, but lots of others didn't. They became part of this coalition, including the United Kingdom, which deployed major troops. So there's one way to do this, which is if you actually believe in allies and alliances, you talk to them. You don't tell them that I've decided to bomb, here's where we are, and now it's time for you to show up.
The president also suggests there is no NATO without the United States, and it seems that he is entertaining testing that proposition.
I mean, NATO would be very different without the United States. We in the United States build up NATO to put ourselves at the center of that organization. I've described it sort of, we're the skeleton of the body that is NATO. We're central to it. It's what we wanted. We wanted to control what was going on. We didn't want our European allies to be able to act independently of ours in major military operations. Frankly, neither did they do. So in that sense, the president is right. NATO is critically reliant on the United States. But there's still 31 countries. They spend an awful lot of money on defense, perhaps not as much as the president would like, perhaps not as much as I would like, but it's still a lot of money that they're spending, over $500 billion collectively. And they have real military capability. In fact, they have military capability we don't have. One of the issues that I'm sure will come up soon is the question of, will the Europeans send minesweepers into the Gulf? Because guess what? We got rid of our minesweepers, in part because we could rely on our allies to do that. So that's the kind of way you deal with allies. You talk to them, you work with them. and work out any differences. You don't tell them what to do and then say, "Oh, you missed your calling. This was a test and you failed."
And Mr. Ambassador, while I have you, the Wall Street Journal, and I was just told this, is reporting that the president is seriously considering some kind of punishment or penalties for NATO countries that did not come to the United States' assistance in this war against Iran. That's just breaking news from the Wall Street Journal. I'm giving to you just as I've heard it. Any reaction?
Yeah, this has been around for a while, sort of this pay to play kind of idea. This idea that if you don't do what we tell you to do, we won't defend you or we won't put troops in there. When the military puts its troops in particular places and works together within NATO to do it for military efficiency reasons. So let's take the issue of Spain, which has been pretty adamant that it couldn't use the airspace for bases that were there. Well, maybe you want to redeploy the destroyers that we have in Spain and put them in Greece. Maybe that helps, but you'd have to rebuild the entire infrastructure. You'd have to pay for building that infrastructure. Costs a lot of money. Maybe that's what the $1.5 trillion that the president wants to have for defense is going to be about. But frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend taxpayer money to redeploy forces that are going to be in no different position than they are today.
Former NATO Ambassador Ivo Daalder, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
NASA, via the amazing work of the Artemis II crew, sharing more stunning images of this historic voyage. NASA released these new photos that include the Milky Way and, of course, the moon. The crew has around 48 more hours on this mission. They're expected to splash down off the coast of my hometown of San Diego Friday evening. Still to come, Congressman-elect Klay Fuller. He joins me live, fresh off his victory to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress. We will ask, among other things, if the margin of his victory should have other Republicans, maybe a bit worried. Also, a voice from inside Lebanon. I'll speak with a World Central Kitchen chef on the conditions today in Beirut. Plus, fired Attorney General Pam Bondi says she will not testify before Congress about the Epstein files. Our political panel will weigh in on that and a lot more. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. Republican Klay Fuller, who had the endorsement of President Trump, beat Democrat Sean Harris in a race to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat in Congress. It's in North Georgia. That result, not surprising. It's a strongly Republican district, but the margin of victory might prove interesting as we think about the midterms ahead. President Trump carried the district by roughly 37 points in 2024, Greene by 28 points. Fuller currently projected to win by about 12 points. So is that worrisome? Congressman-elect Fuller joins us now. Congressman-elect, first thing, congratulations. I'm glad to have you on the program. Explain to my audience how you were processing the size of victory and the outsiders who say, wow, that looks smaller than it should have been.
Well, thank you, Major. I really appreciate you having me. So the thing that I tell viewers is this was an absolutely dominating performance. The thing that you aren't hearing from the national media, obviously, this was a special election. We were the only campaign, the only election on the ballot. The other thing that I'd say, I'd be more worried if I was a Democrat at this point, because they spent $6 million in this race compared to one. They had a candidate in the race who did everything he could to make sure he didn't let voters know that he was a Democrat. And so he was trying to run essentially as a MAGA Republican. And so he wasn't even running as a Democrat, had signs out there that said he was essentially a Republican. And so I think you see the results, and it was still a dominating performance last night. We're really proud of how we did. And I'd be more concerned about the money that the Democrats lit on fire, and they weren't even competitive in this special election.
How do you assess what's happened in the last 24 hours, Congressman-elect, with the ceasefire with Iran?
Yeah, so President Trump is the peace through strength president. And you're seeing this with the negotiations that he's putting in place. Obviously, it's very difficult to negotiate with a death cult. But the thing is, he's trying to make sure he's fulfilling a promise that multiple presidential administrations have done. They've said that this regime that has killed thousands and maimed thousands of Americans since 1979 should never have a nuclear weapon. He's ensured that. He's made sure that our country is safer, that Western Europe is safer, and that the Middle East is safer now because of his actions. And he's going to do everything that he can to resolve this conflict in a responsible manner. And you're seeing that with the negotiations that are ongoing. You're seeing the markets rally. You're seeing oil prices drop. And once we're through this conflict, the world is going to be a much safer place because of the peace through strength President Trump.
As you well know, Congressman-elect, your predecessor, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has been very, very critical of the president and his prosecution of this war. Has the president changed or has she changed?
Well, the thing that I talked to most voters about when I was out on the campaign trail, they're less concerned about any sort of disagreements in the past or any issues in the past. They're worried about the future and the fights of the future, and that's what they wanted to see. They wanted to send a MAGA, America First warrior up to Capitol Hill to have President Trump's back, but most importantly, to fight for them each and every day, because they know that what President Trump's economy is doing is bringing back the good manufacturing jobs that have been hollowed out by economic policy over the last 30 to 40 years. And so the voters here are concerned about sending me up to Capitol Hill to make sure that I'm a fighter for President Trump and bringing back those manufacturing jobs to the district. And so that's what their concern is. They're not concerned about any fights of the past. They want a fighter up there for the future to have their back and to have President Trump's back.
In your district, are your voters satisfied with the president's record on inflation and job creation? Because our polling and other polling continues to suggest the nation writ large is not.
Yeah, well, I'd really like to know what the polling question is, because I hope that the pollsters are saying that when you look at core inflation, which is a better measurement of where inflation is as an economic measurement, core inflation is at its lowest rate since 2021. So President Trump's economic policies are working. It's bringing down core inflation prices to record levels. And also hope the pollsters are reminding voters that this is an inflationary crisis that was inherited by the Biden administration. And President Trump is doing everything he can to fix the Biden administration's mess, and he's doing a great job about it. The short-term issues that we're seeing with the conflict in Iran, with increased gas prices, they're going to be short-term. And as soon as this conflict is over, those gas prices are going to come back down, and that core inflation rate is going to go even lower and set more records.
Congressman-elect Klay Fuller, I say this half tongue-in-cheek, welcome to the jungle. We'll see you in Washington.
Thank you so much, Major. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Coming up, more on the state of the ceasefire with Iran. I'll be joined by Niall Ferguson to discuss where things stand and where they might be heading from here. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Yes, there is a ceasefire, but there are conversations around it that are a little uncertain. Like the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad today warned Americans not to travel by air in the region because of ongoing missile, drone, and rockets. So that means it might not be actually a ceasefire. Hard to know. CBS News contributor Niall Ferguson joins me now. He's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Niall, it's very difficult to describe what's going on because it changes minute by minute, hour by hour. But yesterday we had talk of civilizational destruction. Today we have a very, very fragile, possibly flawed ceasefire. What is your take on where we are?
Well, the president had three options. One was to do what he's done and agree to a ceasefire that required the Iranians to play ball, which they did. The other options were the all-out attack on Iran's energy infrastructure. That was the civilizational threat. The third was to deploy ground forces to try and take control of the Strait of Hormuz, which I actually think might have been the preferable option, the best option of the three. As you say, this ceasefire is one of those ceasefires where there's still a lot of firing going on all sides. Somebody cracked that it was like Schrodinger's cat, which you'll remember was simultaneously dead and alive. Fire has simultaneously ceased and continued. There's actually been no real change in the tempo of Iranian strikes on Gulf states with missiles and drones, nor has there been an increase in the flow of tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. There just has been no change since this ceasefire was announced. And the diplomatic problems that lie ahead are immediately obvious, of which the most important is whether the Iranians are going to insist that there's a ceasefire in Lebanon too, and I'm not clear that the Israelis are interested in that.
And the White House said today that's not included, and what the Israelis did today in Lebanon made it very clear they don't believe it's included. More than 112 civilians in Lebanon reportedly killed, hundreds others wounded in bombing runs over Beirut.
The interesting thing is that everything that's come out of the Iranian regime has said just the opposite, that there has to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. Otherwise, there's not going to be any negotiation, and I suspect the ceasefire could turn out to be dead on arrival. So we've run into some serious trouble right away, to say nothing of the mystery of the Iranian 10 points. President Trump said that the 10 points were a basis for negotiation. Vice President Vance is supposedly going to go and discuss them in Istanbul. But the 10 points that have been released to the media from the Iranian side don't look very promising, since they include, amongst other things, Iran continuing to control the Strait of Hormuz, which would leave Iran in a strategically stronger position than it was in before the war. President Trump says, no, that's a different 10 points. The 10 points he's got are better, but we haven't yet seen those. So there's a big question mark, I think, over what exactly there is to be negotiated about. What I've seen so far, comparing the American 15 points from earlier in the conflict and what has come out of Iran, suggests that there is a chasm between the two sides, which will make it very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult to arrive at a lasting ceasefire. And they've only got 2 weeks, which is, in diplomatic terms, the blink of an eye.
And Neil, the United States and the Israeli government have been very cohesive throughout this process, this 5-week war. Do you think there is any possibility they could diverge in terms of priorities about regime change in Iran? Because the president keeps saying the regime has changed. That's not the attitude of the Israeli government, and it's certainly not the attitude of those on Benjamin Netanyahu's farthest right flank.
That's right, Major. They were never perfectly aligned, the United States and Israel, because I think the objectives of the Israeli government were to do as much damage to the Islamic Republic, to leave it in as big a mess as possible, without a great deal of consideration for, say, the economic consequences of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. I think there was also more of a focus on the Israeli side on assassinating members of the Iranian regime. There was a moment when they had to be reminded that the Strait of Hormuz really did matter. And so there were some initial signs of dissension. The moment of truth is going to be whether President Trump says to Mr. Netanyahu, no, we really do need to have a ceasefire in Lebanon in order to advance negotiations. If he does that, and it wouldn't be the first time President Trump has forced Mr. Netanyahu to do something he didn't want to do, the Iranians will celebrate that as another major victory. So this is a crunch moment. It's going to be very revealing what happens. Clearly, the Israelis have no desire for a ceasefire in Lebanon. They're at the fairly early stages of a major campaign to kill Hezbollah off as a threat to Israel.
Clear-eyed and on point as always. Neil Ferguson, my pleasure to talk to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
The United Nations continues to warn of a humanitarian crisis in Lebanon. Coming up, I will speak with a chef from World Central Kitchen who is helping to feed more than 1 million displaced civilians in that country. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. As we have discussed tonight, reports from Beirut are that 112 people were killed and hundreds more wounded in Beirut because of strikes from Israel. Earlier, I spoke with World Central Kitchen Chef Corps member Aline Kamakian, who is working in Beirut and saw the aftermath of those strikes. As best you can, as succinctly as you can, describe what today was like in Beirut with the strikes from Israel.
Chaotic is the same day like I was in the explosion of 2020 port explosion. Every place is blood, fire, dust, bad smell. Crazy and very chaotic situation. 110 bombs within 9 minutes.
So the Israelis say over and over, this is about Hezbollah in Lebanon, and it will continue to wage this war until Hezbollah surrenders or is eliminated. What you are dealing with, Aline, day to day, are the civilians in Lebanon. Describe what that is like.
This is Lebanon. Today they targeted very condensed and overpopulated civilian supermarkets, the street, every place. It's Lebanese who were targeted. We didn't see any Hezbollah there. You don't see bombs, you don't see guns, you don't see. It's a normal, very nice area where you have shopping malls. Everything is very humane. What happened today is above any imagination, and it's a complete massacre.
And what does World Central Kitchen try to do at the margins, which I'm sure, despite heroic efforts, they're still at the margins, to address the humanitarian needs on an ongoing basis?
Honestly, we were very lucky today. The location that were hit, there is 3 shelters. We have 2 kitchens. We were just finished distributing the hot meals. What we do is to be on the front line, to be very fast, to be able to cook and distribute hot meals for all the displaced people, all the people that are in need. I cannot tell you how much the need increased, and it's very fast increasing. Although WCK is cooking more and more and increasing more and more what we're doing every day, but the need is increasing tremendously faster, especially today. Imagine the 100 buildings went down, so you have a lot of internally displaced people again and again, and all the shelters are overcrowded already. There is no places anymore.
I'm trying to imagine this in my mind, Aline. Do you cook quickly and distribute quickly, so you have to break down quickly to avoid potential strikes?
What we do, we start very early. We try to cook very fast, and we find kitchens next to the shelters so that we don't do a lot of transportation. And the meal is very hot when it's arrived to the shelters. So we try to manage all the operation in a way. Security is first, our team and our volunteers and chefs. And we make sure that the shelter is fast delivered so that they have the hot meals, that they have the good nourishing meal very fast. We accommodate every day with the situation. Unfortunately, I'm torn tomorrow. Should I open the kitchen or not? Should we be able to cook tomorrow or not? Because we were our kitchen were hit. The surrounding of the kitchen were hit today very badly, and we don't know yet. I'm very torn to see what to do. The security of my team, the people that needs food. So it is every day the same thing.
And what is the status of your team members as you know it today?
We are lucky. We are all safe. We lost a cousin of the chef today, and with the civilians that he was working in his work as every day. A lot of people were at their home. I have friends that they didn't find their parents yet. There are a lot of people under the rubbles yet, and we hope that we will find them.
I wish you the very best in all of your efforts, particular and vast. Aline, thank you. World Central Kitchen, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
President Trump says the timeline for negotiations with Iran, wait for it, 2 weeks. No, that's not Trumpian deja vu you're experiencing. We will discuss this 2-week situation and much more with our political panel when we come back. You're watching The Takeout.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Within 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3.
Well, I'd rather give it to you in 2 weeks. We'll have something in 2 weeks.
I would say within 2 weeks or so. Pretty quick. We'll see what happens over the next week or two. We're going to go through a very tough 2 weeks.
We're going to be announcing something, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
A lot of years there. In sequence, that's references for the President of the United States about potential airstrikes or continuing ones against Iran. Greenland proposal, Russia-Ukraine talks, stopping the spread of COVID, aviation infrastructure. The common thread, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I want to bring in our political panel to discuss Democratic strategist Kendra Barkoff-Lamy, friend of the program. Republican strategist Aaron McGuire, also friend of the program. Great to have you here. Is this just a tick, Aaron, like this 2 weeks thing?
You know what? It also sounds like message consistency across the board. When in doubt, 14 days will be the answer from this administration. No, I mean, for him, it's an easy mechanism to kick the can a little and just say, yeah, 2 weeks, give me a little more time, give me a little more time.
Because he knows he will fill up the 2 weeks with other things, and everyone will have forgotten about the 2-week timeline in most cases. Like Greenland. Whatever happened to Greenland?
You'd have to ask the administration, but it's like I said, it's an easy tactic to keep things moving, to keep the conversation going without ever actually being definitive, without ever actually saying this is going to be the hard end date. So he likes to play a little cute.
Kendra, you knew the president and the vice president, that is to say Joe Biden, well. It almost sounds like a tick, like folks or malarkey.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think she's not wrong about kicking the can, and I think people's attention span is not very long these days, and so they forget. But I think the reality here is he doesn't have a strategy to begin with. If he had a clear strategy that he laid out at the front end about why he was doing what he was doing, then I think people would be in a lot different place. But
and in most of those things I just mentioned, infrastructure didn't happen, stop the spread didn't happen in 2 weeks. Russia, Ukraine still waiting. Greenland, not 2 weeks. And we don't know what's going to happen with Iran in the 2-week time period now currently presented to us.
Correct. But in the meantime, gas prices are very high. Prices in the grocery store are still very high. The stock market, while maybe today, maybe the exception, is not doing as well as he claims the economy is doing. And if it keeps going this way, I think Democrats are going to have a very nice election come November, I think. I'm just, guessing here.
So you saw Klay Fuller, the congressman-elect. He said, look, we won. A win's a win. True. But is there anything telling for other Republicans about 14 points when Marjorie Taylor Greene won by 28 and Trump carried that district by 37?
Yeah, you're seeing a bit of a political movement here, and anybody who doesn't acknowledge that is out of their wits here. Now, I know a lot of people say don't take a lot of credit into special elections. They're different. Yes, they are. But so are the electorates we have to look at. And the 24 electorate will be different than the 26 electorate. You get something higher during a presidential election than you do. But either way, when you look at both Georgia and Wisconsin, when we saw elections last night, you are seeing the American people unhappy with Republicans, and that's why they continue to vote to the left. Now, again, the Supreme Court races in Wisconsin, those are nonpartisan. However, everybody knows the side that everybody ends up on.
And the Republicans did not fight that race. Only spent $1 million. They knew they had no chance in that.
There was a ton of money.
It wasn't like the earlier two ones, but they still lost.
They did lose. They did.
Big time.
And that's 5-2 now in that Supreme Court there.
Yeah. What do you see?
And I saw some crazy stat today about how she got more votes than the former president of Syria. I mean, like some insane stat about how many people went out to vote. And so I think it is telling you that people are excited about the possibility of change, even though Wisconsin, you're right, it's 5-2. But people want what they voted for before, which is lower gas prices and lower grocery prices, and that's not happening. And so you're seeing people go out to the polls and to the voting booths, I think, in kind of record numbers.
But I also think, to your point about the short attention span, if Iran ends, if gas prices come back down, if the economy is doing better, if grocery prices are coming down, that will have an effect on the midterms. And if that is happening closer to the midterms versus us now waxing poetic in early April, you will see a different outcome. That's not to say I still think that Republicans won't lose the House. I think that the math is very hard for Republicans to hold the House. However, if people are feeling better about the economy and the direction of the country, it will be harder for Democrats to try and overtake the Senate as well.
We have 1 minute left. Kendra, I'll start with you, then I'll end up with you. So Steve Moore, economist, friend of this administration, was on the program yesterday. He said he's worried about the gas prices eating up or eating heavily into the tax refunds people are going to get from the big, beautiful bill, canceling them out or come close to that.
They are very high. You drive around this country, they're almost $4 a gallon. That is a lot. That is, we've gone almost $2 more.
But I mean, the whole of last year was spent on having this big refund.
Correct.
And the political momentum, the fuel that it would provide. Aaron?
That's right. The higher costs are for the American people, the less their paycheck does. Even if they get a big tax refund, they're like, great, but now I've had to spend an extra $300 this month on gasoline that I didn't expect, and that very quickly can eat up those funds. The American people live their lives at the gas stations and the grocery stores, and so when their money doesn't go as far there, they care a lot.
Aaron McGuire, you get the last word. Kendra Barkoff-Lamy, thanks to have you. Appreciate it very much. We still look at one. There we go. Happy Wednesday, everyone. We're ending the show. Better hurry up, huh? This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. Daily Report coming your way next.